Before we start today's episode, I just wanted to say something that's been on my mind lately, and that's just, the whole point of Faithful Fables is to share the truth about Jesus and what he did for us through these other fictional stories and just this kind of medium of storytelling to really show that in a different way. And sometimes these stories can be very allegorical, but still pointing to the truth, right? And I guess I'm just saying, I want to be bold with what I'm doing. And this episode, ironically, with everything going on these days, this episode is very bold about the gospel, just naturally, as we're going to talk about Edmund. He is, at least in Narnia, he is the perfect example, he and Aslan, and what Aslan does for him, which we're going to get into. But I think it's just, C.S. Lewis is not explicit with this, or he is explicit with this. He's not hiding it, is what I'm trying to say. And so in a time where I want to be more bold about it, this is the perfect episode, and I hope you enjoy. Edmund Pevensie was born in 1930. He is the second son and third child of Mr. and Mrs. Pevensie. He grew up as a good boy, getting along with his siblings, but during his time at boarding school, something seemed to change for Edmund. His family saw him as becoming spiteful in his attitude toward his siblings, who wrongfully gave it back to him in return. He was 10 years old when the Blitz happened in 1940. As a result, he and his siblings were forced to evacuate London to a mansion in the countryside which belonged to Diggory Kirk. In this mansion, the children discovered a magical wardrobe which ended up being their gateway into a magical country of Narnia. Lucy, his younger sister, discovered Narnia first. He didn't believe her, and he actually made fun of her for it. Edmund could be spiteful, and on this occasion, he was quite spiteful. He sneered and jeered at Lucy and kept on asking her if she'd found any other new countries in all the cupboards over the house. Edmund, while looking for Lucy in a game of hide-and-seek, had entered the world of Narnia for himself. He came into the empty room that had nothing but a wardrobe in it. Just as he came into the room, he saw Lucy go into the wardrobe. He decided to go into it for himself, not because he thought it would be a good hiding spot, but because he wanted to continue to tease her about her imaginary country. Once in Narnia, Edmund had encountered the self-professed Queen of Narnia, and as a result, put under an enchantment. With the combination of his already existing spitefulness and now being under an enchantment, Edmund ended up betraying his siblings and giving into temptation. Now under the imprisonment of the White Witch, Edmund found himself miserable and hopeless. His only hope was the one and the only Aslan. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Faithful Fables. Today is a very special episode to me, and one that I've been looking forward to since the start. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the life of King Edmund the Just, Edmund Pevensie. Now, Edmund is one of, if not my favorite character in Narnia. In Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, for sure, he's my favorite character. And we see Edmund have the most character growth and development through out of every character in this book. This is a true story of redemption, and there's a lot that we can learn from it. And before I get into it, I just want to remind everybody that there are some links in the description of this episode, links where you can send me a message, whether you want to make a comment, give me feedback, whatever you want to do. And that includes, like, if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave comments there. Also, make sure that whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening, make sure that you leave a rating as well. That will really help the show to get out to more people. There's also a link in the description to support the show if that's what you'd like to do, and we can keep these episodes coming and get more of them out to everybody. So to start this off, I want to go over briefly just some of Edmund's, some of his characteristics, basically. So some of the big things we see right off the bat is that he lacked confidence, and that within his family unit, he really had to find his place in the family. And he always felt like he was outshined by Peter, like he was living in his brother's shadow. And I think we see that a lot throughout the book. You know, always wanting Peter's approval, doesn't get it. And it really affects him in a negative way. Another thing is Edmund has an attitude. He got mad at his sister Susan for trying to act like a grown-up. As we discussed last time, Susan kind of took on a motherly role for her siblings, and Edmund did not like that. He's 10 years old. He probably didn't like being told what to do to begin with, and then especially from his older sister yet. He was quite mean to his younger sister, Lucy. When Lucy came back from discovering Narnia for the first time, he really laid into her. Like he called her batty. He called her quite batty. And he was spiteful. Like he ruthlessly teased Lucy after finding Narnia. And even after he himself had discovered Narnia and realized that he was wrong and Lucy was right, he still chose to deny it, and he still chose to be mean to her regardless of that. But we'll get into some of that later. He also was just, the book describes him as being mean to some of the kids at his school, and just, I don't know, this whole experience that he had at this boarding school must not have been good for him. And we see when Edmund is first in Narnia that he meets the Queen of Narnia. At least that's what he was told. As we learn, it's actually not the Queen of Narnia, that self-professed title. And this next section is going to be kind of a recap of some of the things we learned in the episode we did on the White Witch, which is who that was. The Queen was actually the White Witch. So this will be a little bit of a recap. And if you haven't seen that episode, make sure you go back and listen to it. But once in Narnia, he accidentally meets her, and she introduces herself as the Queen of Narnia. Of course, this is the only person that Edmund has encountered in Narnia so far, so he didn't know any better. And of course, he believes her. I mean, I would too in that situation. Like, you're in this new place, you haven't met anybody, and then this person comes up to you, and like, I as a 10-year-old, I can imagine that it'd be very easy for him to be swayed by that. But she, as we discussed in her episode, she grooms him. And so I'll recap that a little bit here. She insults him and scares him, calling him an idiot, and puts him in an uncomfortable position. And then while in that uncomfortable position, makes him comfortable. And this made him really not want to disobey. He felt like he had no choice but to obey her. And she keeps harping on the fact that he needs to bring his siblings to her. That really was a point that she repeated it 6 times within that conversation. And she's trying to make sure that thought is in his head so he remembers it. As we talked about in that episode, she knew that 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve were part of the prophecy. We'll get to that. She asks him to keep a secret, which, as we know, is a huge red flag. And then she compliments him. So she first insults him, she puts him down, and then she compliments him after to what now build him up. It's sick stuff, really. The last thing is that she gave him something that he wants more of, which was the Turkish delight. And so she gives him this Turkish delight, which is enchanted, by the way. It's magical Turkish delight. So he's eating it, and he's enchanted by it. He can't help but want more. And so, like Edmund, we all get caught up in this trap, and unfortunately we choose to give in to sin, and because of the attachment to the thing we now crave, we give into it. And trust me, it is a hard habit to break. And the fact that this was magical, yet like there was no chance Edmund was gonna break that on his own. This is where the comparisons to Adam come in. The temptation in the Garden of Eden and the temptation of Edmund do have similarities. However, with the temptation in the Garden of Eden that we read in Genesis, that point when Adam and Eve sinned, that is when humanity fell. And then we contrast that with the temptation of Edmund. Narnia had already fallen. So not a one-for-one comparison exactly, but there are similarities there for sure. Now, if we look at, there's some typical fear responses out there, and typically they're flight, fight, or freeze. There are more, but this is just for an example. And Edmund, I believe, is definitely freeze. When he's afraid, he freezes up. He knew that the witch was going to do something horrible, but we see that he was unable to move. Now, this is either part of the natural response, or there is a theory that it could have been due to magic. It's possible that she was in the process of turning Edmund into stone, but then decided otherwise. But to know for sure is, well, we are unsure about that. We don't know. But that is a theory out there. So we see when he and the witch are talking, he kind of freezes up, even though he knows something horrible is going to happen. And so either that's his natural response to things, or the process of turning him into stone had already begun, but she stopped it. She offered him a hot beverage and whatever he wanted to eat. And as I mentioned before, he opted for Turkish delight, which he readily consumed. It must have been a really special treat for Edmund because it was the object of his temptation. This reminds me of Romans chapter 7, verse 14 to 20. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, that I do not practice. But what I hate, that I do. If then I do what I will not to do, I agree with the law that it is good. But now it is no longer I who do it, but sin who dwells in me. For I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, nothing good dwells. For to will is present with me, but how to perform what is good I do not find. For the good that I will to do, I do not do, but the evil I will not to do, that I practice. For if I do what I will not to do, It is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. I feel as though Edmund wouldn't will to eat the Turkish delight, but he couldn't help it because the sin of it was already in him. It wasn't Edmund doing it, it was the sin dwelling in him. But this was enchanted food, and thus it made him addicted, always wanting more and more. And if he was allowed to eat it, and if he was allowed, he would eat it until it killed him. This didn't happen, but unfortunately, it did leave him sick. Lucy had even pointed out to him that he looked sick. And I don't know, I think when we live in sin, it affects us in many ways. He was confused and sick, and following God does not do this to us. Edmund asked her, the queen, or the witch, for more, but she told him that he must first bring his siblings to her castle. She also promised to make him a king, and that his siblings would become his servants. And so, yeah, when the witch leaves, Lucy shows up, and that's when she had told him that he had looked sick, and she had also been with Mr. Tumnus previously. And so she and Edmund had two very different experiences in Narnia. Edmund was told that she was a queen, but Edmund didn't know any better since this was the first person that he had encountered in Narnia, and Lucy was informed that she wasn't a queen, but a witch, and this made Edmund even more uncomfortable. But because he wanted more Turkish delight, he decided to ignore Lucy on this matter. See, Edmund got caught up in falsehood, and before he knew it, it was too late to escape it. As I mentioned before, this was the only person that he met in Narnia. And this was the only reality that he knew. And the Bible warns us about getting wrapped up in falsehoods in 1 John chapter 4, verse 1 to 6. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come into the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and is now already in the world. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world, therefore they speak as of the world, and the world hears them. We are of God. Who knows God hears us. He who is not of God does not hear us. But this we know, the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Edmund didn't even want to test the falsehood. He was just too enticed by the Turkish delight and the false promises of being made king, which of course he didn't know were false promises at the time. But Edmund and Lucy, they return back through the wardrobe. And once again, Lucy is telling Peter and Susan that she had gone to Narnia and all this, and that Edmund had been there as well. But Edmund, he denies everything to Peter and Susan, and even to Lucy. And this makes Lucy very miserable, as Edmund had been quite mean to her at this time. Peter says that they have seen Edmund be mean to the kids at school before. Edmund was making the decision to do what he was doing and what he willed to do. It was all on him. And he was being his worst self in this moment. It was the worst thing that he could think of doing. The book describes Edmund as becoming a nastier person every minute, and that by doing this, he thought that he had scored a great success. And here we see kind of, at least at this point, Edmund's true colors. He was practicing being a nasty person, and that is what he was becoming, right? Like, if the more you practice something, good or bad, the better you get at it, and he was becoming good at being bad. When he was being mean to Lucy, Peter asks him how he could be this way. And Susan realizes that Peter was right in this moment, and Edmund was being awful. But Susan knew that the priority was Lucy crying, and that they should focus on that instead. "I wish the McCready would hurry up and take all these people away," said Susan presently. "I'm getting horribly cramped." "What a filthy smell of camphor," said Edmund. "I expect the pockets of these coats are full of it," said Susan, "to keep away the moths." "There's something sticking into my back," said Peter. "And isn't it cold?" said Susan. "Now that you mention it, it is cold," said Peter. "And hang it all, it's wet too. What's the matter with this place? I'm sitting on something wet. It's getting wetter every minute." He struggled to his feet. "Let's get out," said Edmund. "They've gone." Oh, said Susan suddenly, and everyone asked her what was the matter. "I'm sitting against a tree," said Susan. "And look, it's getting light over there." "By Jove, you're right," said Peter. "And look there, and there. It's trees all around. And this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've gotten into Lucy's wood after all." And now there was no mistaking it, and all four children stood blinking in the daylight of a winter day. Behind them were coats hanging on pegs. In front of them were snow-covered trees. And Peter turned at once to Lucy. "I apologize for not believing you," he said. "I'm sorry. Will you shake hands?" "Of course," said Lucy, and did. "And now," said Susan, "what do we do next?" "Do?" said Peter. "Why, go and explore the wood, of course." "Ugh," said Susan, stamping her feet. "It's pretty cold. What about putting on some of these coats?" "They're not ours," said Peter doubtfully. "I'm sure nobody would mind," said Susan. "It isn't as if we wanted to take them out of the house. We shan't take them even out of the wardrobe." "I never thought of that, Sue," said Peter. "Of course, now you put it in that way, I see. No one could say you had bagged a coat as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you find it, and I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe." They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so that they came down to their heels and looked more like royal robes than coats when they had put them on. But they all felt a good deal warmer, and each thought the others looked better in their new get-up and more suitable for the landscape. "We can pretend we are Arctic explorers," said Lucy. "This is going to be exciting enough without pretending," said Peter, as he began leading the way forward into the forest. There were heavy, darkish clouds overhead, and it looked as if there might be more snow before night. "I say," began Edmund presently, "oughtn't we be bearing a bit more to the left? That is, if we are aiming for the lamppost?" He had forgotten, for the moment, that he must pretend never to have been in the wood before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away. Everyone stopped. Everyone stared at him. Peter whistled. "So you really were here," he said. "That time Lou said she'd met you in here, and you made out she was telling lies." There was dead silence. "Well, of all the poisonous little beasts," said Peter, and shrugged his shoulders and said no more. There seemed, indeed, no more to say. And presently the four resumed their journey, but Edmund was saying to himself, I'll pay you all out for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs. So we see here a few days later, all four of the siblings have now found their way into Narnia through the wardrobe. While Susan and Peter are wondering what's wrong with the wardrobe, Edmund is immediately suggesting that they leave. At this point, Edmund's starting to panic a little bit. He didn't have a plan ready, and he just wasn't prepared to bring his siblings to the witch yet. And there was a glimpse of a different side of Edmund where, which we would read after what I read here. We would see like he starts to have fun with his siblings, but he forgets that he has to act as though he's never been there before, and we saw that. And he had lied about it, and now it had come out in the comment about the lamppost, and it gave him away. And Peter was disappointed that Edmund lied. It seemed that Edmund may have been trying to impress his older brother, but even if he was, it wasn't in a very smart way. So Peter and Edmund have another conversation. And Peter is still upset with Edmund for lying about how he treated Lucy, or for lying and how he treated Lucy. Edmund shares some advice with Peter about not knowing how to get home, and Peter receives that. We see here that even though there was so much tension between the two, they were still able to have some fruitful conversations at times. There was still some fruit there, even in the midst of all this tension. And that night, the children, they encounter Mr. Beaver, and we've all gone over this in previous episodes, but they encounter Mr. Beaver, who brings them back to his dam, and they enjoy a delightful dinner at Mr. and Mrs. Beaver's house. And just before they went into the dam, Edmund noticed the hills off in the distance where the witch had her castle. And he was still thinking about it because he wanted more Turkish delight and what she had promised him. And so he's still thinking about it. And like I said before, he didn't have a plan when the four of them were in the wardrobe together. I feel like at this point, he's starting to try to come up with something to get them to go there. And so during this time, the beavers tell the children about the Golden Age prophecy, implying that they are the two sons of Adam and the two daughters of Eve that will help fulfill the prophecy. And so again, the prophecy is, wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. When Adam's flesh and Adam's bone sits at Cair Paravel enthroned, the evil time will be over and done. I mentioned in a previous episode that all four children felt something inside when they heard the name of Aslan for the first time. And for Edmund, he felt nothing but a mysterious horror at the sound of Aslan's name. And this was because he was under the enchantment of the Turkish delight, right? And so, unlike his siblings, he had a negative feeling towards Aslan's name. Edmund is not open to Mr. and Beaver's explanation of the prophecies and of Aslan because he was focused on and longing for the power and the pleasure that the witch was promising him. Before he could even hear the explanation of who the witch is, Edmund quietly slips away and goes straight to her castle because he wanted more of his num-nums. Lewis is very deliberate with distinguishing Edmund's motives at this point. Edmund doesn't want any real harm to come to his siblings, but he longs for acceptance and wants revenge on Peter and wants to be preferred over the others. And so it's like in his longing for acceptance that he's doing this. And the witch, I mean, obviously not in reality, but from what she's been telling him, is going to be accepting of him and making him a king and all these things. So he deeply, deeply wants to be accepted. Now there's someone who is accepting him and offering him these things, so he's going for it. And C.S. Lewis notes that deep down inside, he really does know how cruel and evil the witch is. And he's still going through with it. So on his way to the castle, Edmund has thoughts of transforming Narnia into what he considers a better place. This is a distraction for Edmund, though, to not think about his earlier desire. And this was also on his way to the castle. Earlier he had desired to just give up because of the hard journey and go back and make peace with his siblings. But to distract himself from that, he's thinking about what he would do as King of Narnia. And really just the underlying thought that he has is just that he's blaming Peter for all of this. All this said, we learn just how powerful sin is and the importance of repentance. And Edmund has and will have a lot of repenting to do. And now I want to read some more scripture. This is from Luke chapter 15, verse 8 to 10. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost." Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Edmund, he's not really lost, like he knows where he's going, and he left on his own accord, but he is lost in a different way. And so the children and the beavers, they can't find Edmund, and they keep pointing to Aslan being the only one who can save him. The thing is, God will keep searching for us. And likewise, Aslan will do everything he can to save Edmund. As the story continues, we see that Edmund gets to the castle, and he sees a stone lion in the witch's courtyard, which gives him a sense that he should not go through with his plan. And I take that to be like kind of like, in a way, like a conviction of sorts, like maybe the Holy Spirit, like trying to tug at him and trying to convince him. But he decides to go ahead with it, fighting against his conscience, and he even disfigures the statue. The witch was mad. She was mad that Edmund came without his siblings, and she told him that she would be. And there we have it. But in fear, Edmund ended up providing her with the information on where to find his siblings. So at this point, the witch begins to panic, as Edmund even mentioned that Aslan had already returned to Narnia, and that the others were going to go meet Aslan at the stone table. And so the witch made an order, and she had Edmund bound and brought to her sledge. Edmund, the witch, and her fat dwarf, I had to throw in the fat part there, but anyway, they would head towards the stone table. Within hours, the snow and the ice had begun to thaw, which was a true sign that Aslan indeed had returned to Narnia and the prophecy was coming true. And if you want more detail on that, you can go back and listen to the episode I did called The White Witch of Narnia. We kind of talk about that and what all that means. And so on the way to the stone table, they come across a group of Narnians who seem to be celebrating Christmas. This is when things truly start to turn around for Edmund. He wants to be a loving and beloved brother again. He also did not find comfort in trying to say that this was all a dream. Just didn't sit right with him if he tried to convince himself of that. So the witch really shows her cruelty towards this group of celebrating Narnians. And for the first time, Edmund feels sorry for someone other than himself. And with that, I think that, with the snow melting and spring starting to bloom all around him, it's likely helping with that a little bit as well. And so this, long story short, well, maybe not, but the sledge gets stuck in what is now mud and dirt, and the three of them are forced to walk until the witch comes up with a new plan. And so she decides that she would just kill Edmund in order to prevent the prophecy from coming true. As we learned in the episode on the witch, before she got the chance to do this, a rescue party sent by Aslan arrived and saved Edmund. So the witch escapes this, raid from Aslan's army using magic. She causes her dwarf and herself to look like a boulder and a stump, and Edmund is brought back to Aslan's camp. And at Aslan's camp, Edmund had a long talk alone with Aslan, and from that conversation, he was able to now apologize to his siblings for betraying them. Aslan tells them that there is no need to talk to Edmund about his past, and his siblings forgive him. I think they were also just really happy that he was alive and that they found him. And, honestly, what Edmund did was no small thing, but at this point, the forgiveness was complete, and they could now move on as a family, and Aslan deems that it is finished. So the next day, the witch shows up at Aslan's camp, and she demands that Edmund return to her custody, because according to the deep magic, all traitors belong to her, and Edmund was a traitor, so yeah. So to get justice, she demands that Edmund be sacrificed on the stone table. Although he was a traitor and all traitors belong to the witch, Edmund was able to keep his eyes on Aslan and instinctively knows that he is expected to just wait and obey. And this was huge. He had spent so much time looking out for himself until now. In order to stop thinking about himself, he had to meet Aslan. And isn't that true? When we meet Jesus, our mindsets change. It's no longer about us. When we meet Jesus, we want to think about others. And, Edmund, he didn't even care about all the things that the witch was saying and what she was calling him, like a traitor and all these things. He was just focused on Aslan. And guys, when we stay focused on Jesus, we don't hear the voice of the enemy. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Edmund is getting to experience Aslan in a very different way than his siblings are experiencing him. And I think this is very true. Peter, Susan, and Lucy, they also experienced Aslan in some very positive ways. But with Edmund, there was this whole nother level to it. And I think that makes this story and this character of Edmund just, it makes it that much more special, honestly. They will all have these moments with Aslan, but I feel like nothing quite like this. Aslan could not go against the deep magic, but as we learned in the episode I did on him, there was a deeper magic that the witch did not know about. Aslan has a conversation with the witch, and he arranged a deal with her. Edmund would go free, and Aslan would take his place. Even though the children, nobody knows what the deal was. Nobody knows that. They just know that at this point, all they know is Edmund gets to go free. So the witch agrees, and later that night, Aslan gave himself over to the witch and was sacrificed on the stone table, taking Edmund's place. Aslan's sacrifice is very clearly pointing to Jesus' sacrifice for mankind. C.S. Lewis is not hiding that. Aslan took Edmund's place on the stone table. Aslan didn't deserve the punishment, but he willingly laid down his life for Edmund. And this is what Jesus did for us. We have all chosen to sin. We have all broken God's law. And the Bible says that the wages of sin is death, meaning that we get paid in return for our sins with death. In the Old Testament, the Israelites were instructed to perform various sacrifices in order to atone for their sins. It involved a lamb without blemish, meaning that it was perfect. And when we get to the New Testament, we see that fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus is that perfect lamb who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And that's Philippians 2:6-7. So, Jesus is God, right? And he chose to humble himself and come to earth as a man so that he could take our punishment for us and unite us back to God. Now imagine you're in court. You have a stack of speeding fines that you can't pay, and you're going to go to jail. And just then, someone comes into that courtroom and pays that fine for you. You are legally able to go free. That person didn't have the speeding tickets, you do. But he pays the fine for you so you can be free. In the same way, Jesus, who had never sinned and lived a perfect life, took our punishment for us. Remember, the wages of sin is death. We deserve death for our sins. But he came in and paid that for us through his death on the cross, but also with his resurrection afterwards, so that now we can be free. And isn't that beautiful? That's what this is all about. That's what this is all about. With Aslan dead, the witch had only to kill the children now. So the first battle of Baruna began as she and her army attacked the next morning. Edmund fought alongside his brother Peter and the Narnian army. And get this, Edmund, a 10-year-old, killed 3 ogres as he made his way to the witch. In what would be one of the most significant moments in the battle, Edmund fought his way to the witch, and with his sword he was able to destroy her wand, which stopped her from turning other creatures into stone. At the end of the battle, Edmund sees Aslan, now resurrected, although he didn't know that Aslan had even died, take down the witch, ending her century-long reign of terror. During all the craziness of the battle, Edmund was found very badly hurt, and if it would not have been for Lucy and her healing cordial, he may have died from his injuries. It not only healed him from his injuries, but it also seems to have rejuvenated him as a person as well. Now we don't know this for sure, but it is possible that Lucy won her argument with Susan and ended up telling Edmund exactly what Aslan did for him. And we can take this as a possibility because The book describes Edmund growing up to be a graver and quieter man than his brother Peter. I imagine the reality of Aslan's sacrifice would have laid heavy on Edmund. If we didn't know that Christ died for us, then his grace would be cheapened. So I feel like Edmund ought to know, so that he knows just how gracious Aslan is. I think, honestly, he must have known, because if he never knew what Aslan did for him, what's the point, right? And so, for me, if he doesn't know that, there was no point in it. So after the battle, Peter gives the credit to Edmund, saying that they would have been beaten if not for him. And this was very important for Edmund, because since the beginning, he was longing to get that kind of praise, and especially from his brother. Remember before I mentioned that he was longing for acceptance, and he was trying to find that through the White Witch, but now Peter just naturally gives him the credit. And so while, Edmund wasn't even there to hear Peter give him that praise, but I'm sure that it would have been repeated by others, and that he would have heard it through the grapevine eventually. Later that day, Aslan made Edmund a knight of the Noble Order of the Table because of his bravery on the battlefield. And 3 days later, Edmund and his siblings stood in Cair Paravel, where they were crowned kings and queens of Narnia, finally fulfilling the ancient Golden Age prophecy. This all happened in Narnia year 1000. Edmund reigned in Narnia for 15 years. He became known as King Edmund the Just, after having experienced a deep meaning of justice from Aslan himself. During his reign, Edmund would go on to help his siblings in returning Narnia to its former glory. He fought in the army that got rid of the giants. He sailed the Eastern Ocean, visiting the neglected Narnian islands. He established an alliance with the neighboring kingdom of Archenland and opened domestic channels between the southern country of Calormen. In Narnia year 1014, King Edmund and Queen Susan embarked on a diplomatic journey on their ship, the Splendor Highling. Edmund and Susan were bound for the capital city of Tashbaan, where they had intended on signing a treaty. They discovered that Prince Rabadash desired Susan as his wife, and was willing to take her by force if necessary. They were able to escape and return home. This caused Rabadash and his army to march across the desert and overtake Archenland, and Narnia was their next target. King Edmund and Queen Lucy, along with their army, marched to Archenland to meet the invaders. They defeated the Calormen army after a hard-fought battle, and less than a year later, all four siblings were reunited at Cair Paravel. Narnia was brought to a time of peace and prosperity, so they allowed themselves some free time. They went to capture the legendary white stag that Mr. Tumnus has spotted. And there's more detail on that in my episode on Peter, if you're interested. They chased it through the forest of Lantern Waste and came upon a strange iron post in the ground that was vaguely familiar to them. They continued on foot into the wood and start to remember some of their old lives before Narnia 15 years earlier. They end up spilling out of the wardrobe, no longer adults, but as children once again. It was still the year 1940, and they had only been gone minutes in our world. And thus ends the story of Edmund Pevensie, for now. From a young boy with a really bad attitude to a great and successful king, Edmund Pevensie is a beautiful example of how repenting and choosing to turn to Jesus can drastically change the life of the worst sinners out there. So, for everyone listening, I invite you to Jesus, to turn to Him, God in the flesh, who willingly gave up His life so you could have yours. I invite you to a better life. A life of freedom and joy, even joy in trials and hardships. Repent. Turn away from your sin and turn to Jesus so you can spend eternity with Him. That's it for me today. Thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of Faithful Fables. And until next time, stay faithful.